Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and I know that I said in my last video that I'd be covering something a little less gruesome and a little more fun, but unfortunately
I lied.
But the case that I found and I'm going to be covering today is one that is both horrifying but also extremely interesting. It also has a somewhat happy ending, I want to say, so it's a little better than the ones I covered previously, but today I will be covering the Keddie murders. In the summer of 1979, the Sharp family, or at least most of the Sharp family, would leave Springfield, Massachusetts and relocate to the small railroad town of Keddie. The relocation was caused by Glenna Susan Sharp, or as we'll refer to her in the video, Sue, separating from the father, James Sharp. Sue took her 5 kids, John Sharp, Sheila Sharp, Tina Sharp, Rick Sharp, and Greg Sharp, to Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy, Northern Carolina prior to heading to Keddie. She rented a small trailer that was formerly owned by her brother Don, and come fall of the following year, Glenna and the kids would move again to a more suitable place for a family of 6. The Sharp family moved to house number 28 in Sierra, Nevada, more specifically the railroad town of Keddie. For 2 years, the Sharp family was completely unbothered and spent their time doing what a regular family would do, hang out with each other, and when they weren't doing that, each one would be out with some friends or out playing baseball or doing some other hobby. However, after spending much of their time just being good neighbors from all accounts and having a happy life, in April of 1981, the Keddie murders would happen. On April 11th of 1981 at 11:30 a.m., and the day prior to the murders, Sue, Sheila, and Greg Sharp left to go pick up Rick Sharp, who was attending baseball tryouts in Quincy. They returned to house 28 later that day. And while Sue, Sheila, and Greg were all driving to pick up Rick, they had actually seen John Sharp, the brother of the siblings, as well as his friend Dana Wingate, who hitchhiked to the same town of Quincy looking for a party, and they would also return, but later that evening. So, as of right now, the mom and 3 of her kids are out driving together. The other child is out with his friend, John Sharp is out with Dana Wingate, and the last child, Tina, is just at home by herself at this point. Sue, Sheila, Greg, and Rick had returned from picking up Rick from his baseball tryouts and were at home with Tina now. However, Sheila had planned to spend the night at a friend's house, or the Seabolt house, which wasn't too far from house 28. So Sheila went to go to the friend's house, and Tina actually joined her for the walk, but returned shortly after. It's said that they left their house around 8, and Tina then returned back to the house at 9:30 p.m. And then any time between 8 to 9:30 p.m., or maybe a little bit before then, John Sharp as well as Dana Wingate returned from the parties and would also be with the family. And Dana Wingate wasn't the only person who was not part of the Sharp family who was present at house 28. Justin Smart, another neighbor kid, was also at the house. However, he wasn't with John or anything. He was with Greg and Rick, as I guess it was a hangout or a play date or something of that fashion. So Sue Sharp, the mother, Greg and Rick, the 2 little brothers, as well as John and Tina Sharp were at the residence. Those were everyone from the Sharp family that was there. However, at the same house was also Justin Smart as well as Dana Wingate. The only person a part of the Sharp family that was not at house 28 that night, the night of April 11th, was Sheila. She was at the Seabolt house. At 8 a.m. on the morning of April 12th, Sheila returned to house 28. She opened the door and discovered the bodies of Sue Sharp, John Sharp, and Dana Wingate. All had been bound by electrical tape and wire. Tina was nowhere to be found, and the 2 younger Sharp brothers and Justin Smart were unharmed in an adjacent room. Sheila immediately sprinted back to the Seabolt house, letting the Seabolts know what had happened and alerting them to the murder. Jamie Seabolt, the father, entered through the window and retrieved the boys, bringing them to safety, and returned to check if anyone was alive. And while reading this case, it almost feels like they kind of attacked Jamie Seabolt a bit, as they mention how after he saved the boys, he went in to check if anyone was alive, but they mentioned how he tampered with, or could have tampered with, evidence that could have helped them solve the case, which kind of feels a little messed up. This was somebody who stumbled upon a gruesome scene and was trying to help, And it just feels very messed up to try and blame him for tampering with evidence when he was just trying to be a good person and see if anyone was okay. And before I get any farther into the video, I am just going to do a quick trigger warning here, as the murders are quite violent and honestly pretty disturbing. So if you are easily triggered by any sort of violence or possible sexual assault, I would just turn the video off here, as it gets pretty descriptive. I feel like I should just double down that the murders are very gruesome, so really, if you are easily triggered, I do urge you to press off. Sue was found lying on her side near the living room sofa, nude from the waist down and gagged with a blue bandana and underwear which had been taped around her mouth. She had been stabbed in the chest multiple times, as well as in the throat. However, the stabbing in the throat was especially brutal, as the wound passed through her larynx and grazed the spine. Her head had also been struck with the butt of a Daisy 880 pellet rifle. John Sharp's throat was slashed. He was also brutally beaten over the head with a hammer, as well as other just beatings across his body, and Dana had suffered a similar fate with multiple head injuries. However, she was ultimately killed by strangulation. Autopsies would confirm this, as well as confirm that the stabbings and the neck slashings would be the ultimate end of Sue and John Sharp. Investigators found 2 bloody knives as well as a hammer at the scene, and specifically noted how all the blood splatterings and pretty much the whole scene had only taken place in the living room and not anywhere else in the house. Investigators asked the Seabolt family and other neighbors if they had heard anything. The only people who had heard something was the family in house 16. They claimed they had been awoken at 1:15 in the morning by what seemed to be muffled screaming. Many other neighbors, including the Seabolts, claimed they had seen an unfamiliar green van parked at the Sharps' house. One of the neighbors, Martin Smart, stepfather to Justin Smart, who was at the scene, claimed a claw hammer had inexplicably gone missing from his garage. Justin, who had been at the scene, offered conflicting stories and said he dreamed of the murders. In later tellings of the events, Justin would be put under hypnosis, as he claimed to see Sue with 2 men. Justin described the 2 men and their looks, and eventually a sketch was made of what the men could have looked like. Now, a weird but small fact in this case was that the sketches were done by Harlan Embry. He was someone who would volunteer to help with the police every once in a while. As it was a small town, volunteering was just a little way to help out. And it was kind of odd, as he had no forensic training, he had no artistic ability, and they had him do the sketches, despite the fact that they had the whole Justice Department and FBI on their kind of resources. So they could have used anybody from the FBI or Justice Department, and they instead went with a local who had no experience to make these sketches of this grisly quadruple homicide. The sketches were released to the public along with a description of the men, one being 5'11" to 6'2" with dark blonde hair, the other being 5'6" to 5'10" with longer black greasy hair. Both wore gold-framed sunglasses and were assumed to be aged late 20s to early 30s. Now, right after the murders occurred, a lot of rumors started to circulate around the town, and obviously that would happen as something as grisly as this happening in a small town. Of course, it's just gonna, become the big topic. And a lot of people started to put out these ideas that it could be something ritualistic, or it could have been involved in some kind of drug trafficking. The sheriffs and the people working on this were quick to dismiss this, as there was no proof on the scene of the crime that would enforce this in any way. While the original investigation was going on, everyone was still searching for Tina. Despite the California State Department handling the search so well that the FBI backed off, saying that they were doing an adequate job and made the FBI's presence unnecessary, they still didn't find a trace of her and originally chalked it up to being a kidnapping. A 5-mile grid search was done around the house following the discovery of the crime scene, which would ultimately be fruitless, as well as many other searches that still didn't turn up anything. It wouldn't be until April of 1984, almost 3 years after the murders, that a bottle collector would accidentally stumble across the cranium portion of a human skull and part of a mandible at Camp 18 near Feather Falls. He would send these into a forensics lab, and in June, the remains were confirmed to be Tina's. And something super horrifying is that almost like directly after they announced that they had found Tina's skull, someone had called the police station saying that they knew where the rest of Tina's skull was and gave them a location. And when they went to check, sure enough, there it was. However, the police were not recording the call, and ultimately this ended up just being something super horrifying in this story. Now, weirdly enough, they did mention that in 2013 someone did have a recording that was kind of hidden in an evidence box, but then it wasn't really mentioned after that, so I don't know what happened there. Now, it's not exactly known what happened to Tina and what ultimately killed her, but from what I was able to find, it is believed that maybe she was in fact kidnapped for a while and then was killed and just thrown into this area. And part of her skull, whether it was because of the way that she was killed, maybe she was beaten, or maybe even wildlife had gotten to her, that's why it was ultimately found farther away from the rest of the body or the rest of the skull. But it's not exactly known what happened to Tina. There were two main suspects in this case, and before I talk about them, I want to talk about James Sharp, the ex-husband. If you were to ask me when I originally read this story who I thought did it, I'd say James Sharp. I'd bet all my money on it, but after reading more about the case, these two suspects I'll talk about in a bit are absolutely guilty. Like, oh my god. But anyways, I thought it'd be James Sharp because the family moves this far away from him. That usually implies that he could have been abusive in some way, but at the same time, I feel like they would have mentioned that in the case, or they would have brought him up more. Aside from, just mentioning why they had moved to Keddie in the first place, James is pretty much left out of this story completely. And the police did check in on him, I believe, to just kind of get an alibi out of him, and I'm pretty sure he was just like nowhere near the family. Like, he was in a completely different part of the state, and he had a very solid alibi, so he had no reason to be a part of this murder. But the two suspects that we'll be looking at, who I honestly read about at first and didn't believe they'd be suspects, and then I read a little more, and now I'm 100% convinced that they did it, is Martin Smart. The two main suspects were Martin Smart and John something French. You French people. Martin Smart was the stepfather to Justin Smart, the boy who was there the night of the murder and gave a bunch of clues to the police, as well as what ultimately led them to make the sketches. He was also the man who claimed to have had a hammer gone missing from his garage. Later, it was revealed that following the murders, Martin had traveled to Nevada and written to his wife, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." If you're wondering how John fits into all this, he had been staying with Martin at the time of the murders and was good friends with the man. He also had connections to organized crime. And if that wasn't good enough, a counselor that Martin would often see said he had gone so far as to admit to murdering Sue and Tina. Martin explained that he murdered Sue as he believed that she was trying to convince his wife to leave him. If you're wondering why he would do this, it is because Martin was extremely violent and abusive to his wife, with many people noting bruises on her every now and again. He also stated that he did not kill John and Dana. Now, this answers a few questions as well as propping up a few. We now know that Tina was in fact killed, and she was probably killed that night, as I feel like he would have said something, more than just, "I killed Sue and Tina." So we could maybe make the guess that Tina was killed that night and maybe just moved off. And it does answer the question, if he thought Sue was trying to break them up, why would he kill Tina too? Why would he bring Martin over? And honestly, this is an emotional, abusive man who is completely prone to aggression. So it's not crazy to think that he was doing something to Sue. Tina was there, and a man like that is unfortunately not going to have a lot of remorse. And honestly, for the "I didn't kill John and Dana," I just chalk that up to John doing it. I don't think that's like, oh, well, they just fell on a bunch of hammers and slit their own throats and strangled themselves to death. Like, I think that was probably just him saying, "I didn't do it. John did, but I didn't do it, so I'm free of that." Like, that's just kind of what I get from it. It would also kind of explain why the 3 boys, Greg, Rick, and his stepson Justin, were left unharmed. Why would a man go in there and, seemingly fighting for his family, kill a member of his family? And even then, I feel like submitting your son to hearing 4 people brutally murdered is like as abusive and horrible as a person as he has to be. I don't know how he would like allow his kid to go over and still murder them. It's horrifying. And honestly, even with all this, even with John saying, or not John, but Martin saying, I killed him for your love, and telling the counselor that he killed them, but he didn't kill these 2. All that, I just kind of thought that could have been the ramblings of someone close to the case who had a kid there. That wasn't until I learned that he was abusive and very aggressive, then that was the thing that kind of made me flip sides. But the other thing that made me flip sides is when I looked up what Martin Smart looked like and compared him to the sketch. It is uncanny. Now, of course, this is from when his son was under hypnosis, or his stepson, so it could be a coincidence, but oh my god, it's almost like they're twins. It's insane. It's actually horrifying. Sadly, Martin Smart died in 2000, and John, the French guy, died in 1988. And I don't say sadly because they were good people. I think they were scum of the earth. I say sadly because if they did do it, then they never faced any prison time for these actions, and they just got to be free men for the rest of their lives, which, if they did do it, that's heartbreaking. 4 years after Martin's death, the house was demolished, and then subsequently, 12 years after the house was demolished, a hammer matching the description that Martin described his hammer that had gone missing had been found at the bottom of a lake. And the sheriff who had taken over the case, who was 16 at the time, who was kind of familiar with the area, stated that you don't just lose a hammer like that in this pond. It is deliberately hidden there. This is what I believe happened that night. And if I get anything wrong, please correct me. But I do think Martin Smart and John were the culprits. I think they were the people who committed this crime. And I don't think this was some act of passion. I think this was a calculated and precise attack on the family. But I don't think it was originally supposed to be the 4 people. I think it was only supposed to be Sue, as she was the only one telling Martin's wife to divorce him. And when I say it's planned, I don't think this was some genius, plan made by 2 masterminds. I think they just were together and said, we're going to kill her. And I think it was only intended to kill Sue originally. So when they went in that night and saw more than just Sue there, it was too late to back it up. I think they brutally murdered Sue and the other 2 until Martin realized, my kid's here. I can't do this. And he then brought Tina out near the pond where he killed her then, dispatched of the hammer, and left her there to die. That's what I believe happened. It would explain why Tina wasn't found at the scene, and it could explain why the hammer that had gone missing, sorry that I can't move this whole hand, ruptured tendons, it would explain why that's at the bottom of the pond and why Tina's not at the house with the rest of the victims. And I think this would explain it very well, except for the fact that that's definitely not what happened. Because police noted how, even though it was brutish and violent, it seemed like they had all the time in the world and took their time in the house with killing these people. And the fact that they were tied up meant that they had more than planned this. That this wasn't just, oh, we're just going to kill Sue. Oh, they showed up and we got to kill them too. They knew they were there. These are 2 horrible people that deserve to rot in prison, but are now they have gotten away with it, which is horrible. But you want to know the weirdest part? We probably won't know it because in 2018, the last development of this case that is public was released, and it put another screw or another weird fact into this whole debacle. See, the sheriff who was now taking over this case, the same one who was around 16 when the original murder happened and had known the area well, he had stated that they recovered a piece of tape from the original crime scene and they got a piece of DNA off it. You want to know something about that? The DNA was for an alive suspect. An alive suspect would take Martin Smart and John out of this. What? And we haven't gotten an update about it in 7 years. So we don't know who this alive accomplice was, as there was only supposedly 2 men, but of course that was only from a little kid's hypnosis, Martin and Smart, and John could have been working with someone else, but then who is the alive person? Is he the person who maybe was driving the van, the green van that they saw that night? These are all questions that we sadly probably won't be answered for some time, but if I can take something positive out of this, it's the story of Sheila. Sheila, Greg, and Rick bear the weight of this event. Immediately following, Sheila had to act as almost a mother to her brothers. In recent years, Sheila, now 50, talks about how hard it is to get close to people and the uncertainty of what happened that night. No word on what the other siblings are up to, but Sheila is happily married with kids and grandchildren, so thankfully she was able to somewhat recover from the incident and live a partially happy life. And sadly, that's all that we know for now. Anyways, guys, that's it for the video, but I did just want to quickly say that Sheila is the real, just kind of hero of the story, I guess you could say, to come across your family brutally killed, especially your mother, in this way, and then, immediately take on the role as a mother to your remaining family is extremely just so powerful of her to do that, because she was right at that age. I believe she was like 14 or something, so she was at that age where she didn't have income to take care of these kids, but she knew the weight of what happened. She knew the weight of the crime scene and everything going on. It is really inspirational, or just like powerful, that she was able to marry and have kids after this event. And I wasn't able to find any information about Greg and Rick, but I really hope that they're doing okay. I can only imagine what that has to do to you. I mean, thank God that they're still alive and they still had at least one sister to be with them. So, grateful. Like, you got to be happy about that, but it's a sad story. But I'm happy that, unlike the last one, there is some sort of happy ending. But yeah. Anyways, guys, for the next couple of videos, I am going to be kind of moving away from true crime, as it gets a little depressing after some time. So I'm going to be moving in with the next video I'm going to be doing next week is I'm blind and my stairs have more steps. And that's a story off Reddit, which I found really good, and it was recently on Creepcast and just phenomenal. So I'm going to do a breakdown and a kind of recap of that story. So that will be for next week, and the week after that is supposed to be another kind of story related thing. I won't cover what it is just yet, as I do have to work some things out before I can do it, but I hope you guys enjoy everything on this channel and everything coming. I'm super grateful for you guys, and yeah, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.